Larry, thank you for your very strong words, and thank you for everyone that's here on this webinar. You know, words are inadequate to convey my respect and gratitude for the amazing work you are doing to end modern day slavery and to rescue victims of both sex and labor trafficking. Like you, I believe we have a duty to act, to shine a bright light on these egregious human rights violations, and to eagerly accept Jesus' challenge to hunger and thirst for righteousness, and to recognize and help those, as we would the Lord Himself, who have been forced to be the least of our brethren. As you mentioned, last October 28th marked the 20th anniversary of a law that I authored, the Trafficking Victims Protection Act of 2000. Though it is hard to believe now, when I first introduced the act in the 1990s, the legislation was met with a wall of skepticism and outright opposition, dismissed by many as a solution in search of a problem. For most people at that time, including lawmakers, the term applied trafficking to almost exclusively to drugs and weapons, not human beings. Reports of vulnerable persons, especially women and children, being reduced to commodities for sale were often met with surprise, incredulity, or indifference. With a tremendous push from the faith-based community, especially the Catholic Church, the Trafficking Victims Protection Act of 2000 was enacted into law, and it created a new whole-of-government domestic and international strategy and established numerous new programs to protect victims, prosecute traffickers, and to the greatest extent possible, prevent it in the first place, the 3 Ps. It included a number of sea change criminal code reforms, including treating as a victim and not a perpetrator of a crime anyone exploited by a commercial sex act who had not attained the age of 18, and anyone older where there was an element of force, fraud, or coercion. Thousands of human traffickers have been prosecuted and jailed pursuant to the act, including all charges brought against Jeffrey Epstein and the infamous convictions involving Smallville actress Allison Mack and the 120-year jail sentence for Keith Raniere's, part of that Nixon cult. And the TVPA established the President's Interagency Task Force to monitor and combat trafficking, bringing all the parts of the government to bear. Everybody is a part of it. The U.S. State Department's Trafficking in Persons Office, the annual TIP report with its tier grading of every nation's record in making serious and sustained efforts to eliminate human trafficking. As you know, those relegated to what we call Tier 3 are subject to sanctions. The act also included sheltering and a national hotline, and on the refugee side, created a new asylum category, the T-visa, to protect victims and their families. You know, have visited trafficking victim shelters here and all over the world, including in Russia, Bolivia, Ethiopia, Nigeria, Romania, Ukraine, Italy, Greece, and more. In Lima, Peru, for example, the Catholic sisters showed my delegation how they not only brought the good news of the gospel to broken young women, but taught them life skills and job training as well. It was clear that despite their severe trauma, many of those girls and young women were filled with that kind of joy that surpasses all understanding. In Rome, I met a Nigerian young woman who described how her journey to hope and renewal from the streets began when she got into Sister Eugenia Bonetti's rescue van and then to her shelter. Victims, I believe, have no better friend than you who are on this webinar. Meanwhile, while all of us are focused on combating COVID, one highly disturbing fact has emerged. The pandemic has put women and children everywhere at higher risk of exploitation, abuse, and trafficking, and has done so by making it more difficult to assist both current victims and survivors, by heightening insecurity of victims as government and philanthropic funds are refocused on other priorities and personnel are diminished, by making it more challenging to ensure a sustained and robust criminal justice response, and by prevalent spikes in grooming by predators of children who are not able to attend school and who are online now more than ever. All of us, especially parents, must talk with their kids and empower them to know the signs and resist. As we emerge from the pandemic, we need to prepare for and redouble our efforts to prevent and prosecute a likely explosion of pent-up predator demand. As I think many of you know, in 2019, I authored another law called the Frederick Douglass Trafficking Victims Prevention and Protection Act to educate school staff and recognize and respond to the signs of sex and labor trafficking and to provide age-appropriate information to students on how to avoid becoming a victim. Such programs are a critically important way to inform, enlighten, and warn our young people, making them situationally aware and hopefully preventing and reducing the number of future victims. Situation awareness training, as you know, has made hotel, airline, bus, truck, and train personnel and others more likely to recognize and thwart human trafficking. You know, women and girls, as you know, are disproportionately abused by forced labor and account for the majority of the victims in the commercial sex industry. However, a 2013 report from ECPAC USA titled, "And Boys Too," concluded that the scope of the commercial exploitation of boys is vastly underreported. Some of you, I know, are very familiar with that 2016 study commissioned by the U.S. Department of Justice that found up to 36% of the children forced into the U.S. sex industry were male. Finally, in 2008, I introduced the International Megan's Law. It passed the House in 2010, 2014, 2016, and thankfully finally cleared the U.S. Senate and was signed into law in 2016, 8 years later. Megan Kanka was from my hometown of Hamilton, just 7 years old when she was kidnapped, raped, and brutally murdered in 1994. Her assailant lived across the street. Unbeknownst to her family and other residents in the neighborhood, he was a convicted repeat child sex offender. Megan's heartbroken to this day parents, Maureen and Richard Kanka, two very close friends, have been amazingly effective in successfully pushing every state in the Union, including New Jersey and some foreign countries, to enact Megan's Law. So why International Megan's Law? We know from law enforcement, academia, and media documentation that Americans on the U.S. sex offender registries are frequently caught sexually abusing children in Asia, Central and South America, Africa, Europe, and frankly, everywhere. The inherent secrecy of international travel enables child exploitation. Now, under International Megan's Law, a major prevention strategy, convicted child sex offenders who travel abroad must provide notice to the U.S. government via the Angel Watch Center prior to departure of all planned destinations. Failure to do so carries a significant jail term, commensurate with a convicted child sex abuser not reporting to local law enforcement. Upon receipt of the travel itinerary, the U.S. government informs the destination country or countries of those plans. The destination country or countries are then empowered with actionable information to render the child predator inadmissible. More than 13,000 notifications have been made since enactment, and some 5,500 have been denied entry. Concerned that some may fail to include their true destinations, in other words, put countries down where they're going but not the real destination, and out of an abundance of caution and concern for kids, their passports contain the following message that will not likely go unnoticed by border agents. And I quote it: "The bearer was convicted of a sex offense against a minor and is a covered sex offender pursuant to 22 U.S. Code Section 212B. To conclude, so much has been accomplished by each of you, and of course, much more remains to be done. But the enormous challenge before us is to not grow weary in doing good, but through prayer and fasting, constantly renew our hope in God. Continue as you have, to show much love and empathy for the weakest and the most vulnerable, as we commit and recommit to running with endurance the race fixed before us." Thank you so very much.